Yeah, so who I am and what I do. So I am a clinical sports psychologist. I'm a licensed psychologist in Michigan, and then actually with this new SIPACT legislation, long story short, I do telehealth. So I'm able now for in about 30 states across the United States, also able to legally practice with, clinical issues. So things like I really specialize in a lot of performance anxiety. So I'm able to practice across state lines if people have really difficult levels of adjustment. But then I also do a lot of mental training as well. So these are athletes who are doing fine, but they want to be excellent. So when you think about mental toughness, how to be better, more consistent than your opponents and remaining determined, focused, confident, in control under pressure. Again, I have a real specialty in what I like to call the normal anxiety. People often will come to me like on the daily, worried about like making a mistake. They don't want to disappoint their teammates. They find themselves being a little bit passive and not, playing, particularly in teams or leagues that they're really are most important to them. And they kind of shy away from it, pass the ball when they should be taking open shots, for example. And they kind of see it as a problem, but I'm able to really right away help them, and we'll talk about it today, help them understand that, this is a real threat. And I am not about positive thinking and building confidence. If you have it, that's great. But we will talk today, I'm sure, about that. That is not the way. I strongly believe is not the way to go ahead and about this. Sport has real threats that we need to learn how to accept and perform through. And so that's really what my practice has been about. I have an online membership called Success Stories. And so if you like what I'm talking about here too, it's a great membership online where a lot of the things that I teach are in video format. You can go at your own pace in a community of other high achievers. And so I've been loving that, being able to get this message across to many more people. And so again, thank you for having me on here. The more people I can help, the better.
That's so awesome. And I already have so many questions. So the first thing I'll say, I'm going to kind of feed off what you just said. The normal anxiety, I kind of love that term because that's definitely who we're trying to target and kind of get our message across is that everyone has some form of mental illness or some form that they're struggling with that they can obviously improve a lot of. And there's of course different types of cases, moderate versus severe. But just letting everyone know that you can be happier and it's something that you have to train for, right? It's not something you can just wait to happen. Um, and in terms of the positive thinking too, like you said, um, if you have that, that's great. We definitely don't have that. We talk a lot about how we can switch our worldview, how we see the world, or how we intentionally respond to questions that we have. But what you said, like the first step is acceptance first. So seeing this situation in the present moment, accepting kind of the way things are, not telling yourself, that you're not nervous or
Mhm.
trying to convince yourself of what is not happening or convince yourself that there's a different situation happening. That's obviously not the case. And so I think what you said is awesome. You just have to first accept kind of the way things are, look at it as objectively as you can, which is a big thing we talk about is separating ourselves from the person that watches our thoughts, and then of course the person that tries to trick us, the negative Nelly that's constantly getting in our own way. But kind of if you've watched our curriculum, kind of how we set things up, Dr. Eddie is so I looked at things in how do people cause themselves to struggle? Like what are the most common ways we cause ourselves to struggle? Okay, and I ordered those from, the most common to least common, and that's kind of our upside down pyramid. And so the upside down pyramid is us. We need to break down these habits first, understand why we're doing this, and why it's so bad for us, and breaking down those habits. And then of course the pyramid, the opposite pyramid is we're building up the wholesome habits. And of course it's in an upward direction now because the base is the most important part, and that's the solution to the biggest part that causes struggle. And so in terms of, and we can talk more of kind of what mental training activities we would give for someone like normal anxiety. That's actually going to be one of the first questions I'll have for you is kind of what do those look like? Because I'm sure they're a lot different than what we have, and we can learn from that. But the like example, the first on our pyramid, the biggest problem people have is that they listen to their thoughts blindly. Um, and so that's the big part that we teach is, awareness and what mindfulness is and how simply watching and like accepting what is and being able to do that drastically increases your ability to make rational decisions, So instead of, like you said, am I letting my teammates down? Or we're getting nervous before games that you've put in all this work and you don't want bad things to happen. Um, that first comes with knowing that those thoughts, feelings don't mean truth, and those thoughts aren't real, right? They're just present moment thoughts of the future. And so that's also a big part of what we call the time traveling brain. And that's really what anxiety is you're not where you are. So learning to let go of what's not now is obviously going to get you more into what's real, which is this present moment, and what's not real. And so we also like to use analogies like, we all have VR headsets in our brain. Essentially, we're always simulating we think is going to happen, or simulating what did happen in the past. And so we're living in basically not what's reality, and that's right now. And so, like, that's an example. That's step 2 of our curriculum, is how do we what's the solution to our time traveling brain? And of course, that's learning how to be present. You build that by being concentrated. Um, and so that's kind of a brief overview of what we do, doctor. So I'm sure it's similar, but also a lot different than what you have. But why don't we what kind of mental training activities would you give for someone that has something like normal anxiety for playing, or someone that's comes into you and, is getting nervous before games?
Yeah. So first of all, I love what you're doing. I mean, you're exactly right. My hope is I can actually maybe plug some holes earlier on in here that helps exactly what you're saying to be a little bit more effective.
Yes.
'Cause what I like, again, even like some of the words, if I could pick at you a little bit, when you're
Hmm.
like, "Okay, well, we all have some mental illness." Ooh, like I kind of get prickly with that one. I'm like, because that word right away makes us feel bad.
Yes.
Illness suggests that there's something wrong. And
Hmm.
so the very first step, when you threw around like the normal anxiety, like in throwing the quotes around, it kind of undermines it. But I am so passionate about 100% conviction about understanding how anxiety, most of the time in basketball and what we're going through, has absolutely no pathology to it at all.
Hmm.
And if we can understand its purpose and really internalize and understand what it's doing and why it's doing it and why we have to feel it in basketball,
Hmm.
then all the strategies that you have in your mental game plan are going to work much better.
Yep.
Because until we create safety in the anxiety, there's no way that we could ignore it. We could say that it's fake, and that's actually to a lot of degrees true. I've worried about a ton of things that never happen.
Hmm.
Time traveling, absolutely. All of our anxiety is about not what's happening right now, but what we think is the next step or what's going to happen. So you're 100% there. But I start off with saying, having a conversation and saying, like, let's really talk about what this anxiety is. So the normalization point, I start off this way. We have 4 basic human emotions. We used to think there were 6 or 7. You look at psychological literature, and we used to kind of think that there was, a little bit more, but there was this great study done a number of years back, facial recognition, people a lot smarter than I, they're able to look at the biological determinants. Long story short, Jack, tell me, if you want to narrow down all of our emotions into 4 basic ones, what are they?
Um, Happy, sad, angry, and hmm, anxious. Is that 4?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Now do the math. How many of those are positive? How many of those feel good?
1. 25%.
So let's start right there.
Hmm.
I have 4 options to feel something on this earth.
Yep.
One of them feels good. And
Yep.
everything that we are doing is trying to get into that 25% of humanity.
Hmm.
That's never going to work.
Yep.
And then we pathologize sadness, anxiety, and anger. I don't know about you, but anytime I'm pissed off and angry, people say, "Oh, Eddie, calm down." Anytime I'm scared, they're like, "Oh, don't worry about it." And anytime I'm sad, people are trying to cheer me up.
Hmm.
But 4 basic human emotions, and we're going to have to learn how to play basketball with all 4 of them.
Hmm.
Because it makes sense that if you get a bad call, you're going to be angry about that. How you respond to it is different, but the fact that you're angry about it is if you lose, you should be sad. I've had sometimes parents bringing kids to me because they cry after games. I'm like, I'm not going to do anything. like it's fine to cry after a game. You're sad. Now, we can get into the pathology that if you're punching people afterwards, you're slamming, the wall after games, if you're getting penalties as a result, we can get into some pathologies, but we have to start off that anxiety is incredibly important. Like if I wasn't scared about losing, I wouldn't practice very hard, right? I mean, if I wasn't scared of failing that test, I wouldn't study.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to put a positive spin on this. It
Hmm.
still sucks. It hurt my performance. It makes, asking people out on dates difficult. It makes like, you talk about anxiety. And like my concern about what I want to have in the future is real. It's
Mhm,
how we respond to it. So that's what I mean about the normal anxiety. It's actually our survival instinct.
mhm,
We have a brain that tells us, and if you're listening to the podcast now, write this down. This is an important part. But our brain's job is to tell us what could go wrong, not what will. And if
mhm,
you do anything to shut that down, it's not going to work. You can't shut down your survival instinct.
mhm,
But if you understand it as your ally, that this is my survival instinct that's going to constantly throw out visions of the future and all the things that could go wrong with this negativity bias.
mhm.
And I can relate to it in an appreciative way, as you had said, without believing all of it, never ignoring it, because it's going to warn me. Like very often when we're anxious, I have players who come in and they're worried about losing. They're worried about not making it to the next level. They're losing, worried about missing the free throw, disappointing their teammates, not making it, to the championship, like whatever. Like, of course, you got to pivot to those things and say, I should be anxious about this because I care. And by the way, the more I care, the more I'm going to worry because the bigger threat it is, not the more likely it'll happen. But the more I care, the more if I don't get it, the more it's going to be hurt. Therefore, I'm going to worry more about it as part of a
Yep,
survival instinct. So the response, once you've created the safety, then becomes, so what am I going to do? Because I'll tell you, every player is listening out there, you could be better. And I
mm,
don't mean that to insult you, but I'm saying, at the pro level, you could always be better. Until you're shooting 100% free throws and 100% from the 3-point line and, stopping every shot until you win a basketball game, 150-0, you could be better.
yeah,
And so your mind is going to keep telling you that. And I don't want you to get all caught up in having to be confident and having to think positive. And because the fact is that anxiety that's telling you what could go wrong, if you respond to it and say, so what do I need to do? That's going to advance you to the next level. Sorry for my tirade. I kind of went into a lot,
no,
but
that what you said was awesome, and I'm glad you're here to pick my brain and pick my presentation apart because you're right. The way I'm explaining it right now, I can definitely explain it better. So when I say, for example, when we're trying to break down these bad habits, that doesn't mean we're trying to deny what's real or what they do for us. Like, so what I like when I'm talking about emotions, what you said, like emotions are here, emotions want to belong, right? That's why they're here, that's why they were made.
yeah.
So it's not about suppressing any emotions, it's not about suppressing thoughts, it's about learning how we deal with those thoughts, right? And the how we deal with them is we learn to watch and not listen blindly to that person in our head. And by watching, that allows the third person, which is reason and wisdom and response. And so I say the only controllable you have in life is that response, right? So you have a stimulus and there's this tiny little gap right here, and that's where all ultimate power lies. And then you have the response. And so, for example, when I say listen to thought is the number one way you cause yourself to struggle, doesn't mean we want you to stop thinking. It means we want you to learn how to listen and then learn how to respond. Um, so what you said was beautiful. Completely agree with everything you've said. And like you said, it's needed. It is 100% needed. It's just learning how to best handle that need versus constantly listening to anxiety.
And the biggest philosophical shift there is we are built to kind of be in conflict, especially again, you do your programming as you want, but I mean, when we talk about sort of the bad things, again, that's an evaluative term that automatically is going to be like, I got to get rid of the bad stuff and just do the good stuff. And
Mhm,
so some of the language might be actually creating more conflict as opposed to encouraging the acceptance that you're wanting. So I
mhm,
wouldn't say that anything that an athlete's going through on that bad stuff, there's going to be a good motivator for it. Things that may not help basketball, but that doesn't mean that they're bad. It means that I'm protecting myself against rejection, protecting myself against embarrassment. Like we're motivated to do bad things for very good reasons. So they're not really bad. They're
yeah,
maybe unhelpful. They
mhm,
may not be working given the higher level goal that I have.
mhm,
But all of these bad things that we do are for very good reasons. And we must lean into that and then decide, do I want the relief that not taking the shot in the game's final minutes gives me because I don't, I protect myself from that mistake? Or do I become willing to take that risk, suffer that pain if it doesn't work in service of the goal of making that shot?
mhm,
And you get to pick. And that feels different to me. Because if you want to play recreationally and not be the person under pressure, well, then you can do that. Now, you can't get to the NBA that way, but you get to pick. If you don't want to put yourself in that situation and you want to prioritize your relief, I'm not going to tell you not to do that. You don't have to. Now, the next level after that is to kind of resolve. You can't be comfortable, stay avoidant, stay protective, and excel. That's unfair.
Hmm.
That's just simply unrealistic.
Yeah.
But please, athletes, don't label yourself as bad or broken. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with you. If anything that Jack and I have just talked about is happening to you, I would absolutely say it's not bad. You're not broken. And there's an opportunity to learn and respond differently.
Yes. And what you're saying is perfect again. And it's very hard to kind of explain that type of judgment and or how to stop labeling things good or bad. We want
Hmm.
to stay away from that. We want to just understand that they're different, right? And like you said, bad things that we quote unquote think are bad happen for good reasons. Like it's trying to do good for us.
Yes.
Um, they're just different. It doesn't mean that one's higher or lower than the other. They're just not the same. But that's obviously very hard. We've learned a lot about psychology, so we kind of get how that would work. But from first person standing hearing that for the first time, I get how that could be confusing. Or how do I not gauge some things as good or bad? Um, and then, like you said, you can always be better, and that's really the form of thought in the present moment. I like to say that's where all growth lies. If you're not fully here, you're not going to be fully concentrated on how do I improve myself or how do I stop this different form of thinking and maybe form a new way of thinking that is going to excel or improve whatever I'm aiming for. And another thing before, and I'll let you keep talking, is you talked about, I can't remember exactly what you said, but it reminded me of what I like to call aim and aimlessness. So you want to have a good balance between both, in my opinion, because you don't want to get too lost in where you're going without also being aimless in the present moment. Because, like I just said, if you're not here focused on now how to reevaluate how you're responding or how to do things differently, you're not going to be able to grow as much. So, like for my journey, I was so focused on the end goal, and so I didn't take the time to be present and reevaluate. Is what I'm doing right now the best thing for me to be doing to get to where I want to go? And so it's not being fully lost in that goal, but it's also not being fully lost in the present moment because then you have no direction. You have no idea where you're going or where you want to improve. Um, and so I can't remember what you said that reminded me of that, but that's kind of where my thoughts went after what you were saying. But I'm eating up everything you're talking about right now, Dr. Eddie, because I love it.
Good. Yeah, let's keep volleying back and forth because so you glossed over it, but I want to, in everything that you just said, I want to pull out the one sentence that I think is golden, and I would love for you to like triple, quadruple down on it.
Okay.
And it was that moment, I'll call it a moment of mindfulness. It's a big part of what I do with my athletes, the ability to step outside of yourself and observe or to notice. That's an essential skill. And when you asked yourself that question, you gave yourself a moment and said, hey, is what I'm doing right now working? Like we've all heard that before, and that makes logical sense. Incredibly hard to do that when you're panicking, you're scared, your anxiety's up, you get the urge where I could talk forever about all these other tangents and we can come back to it. But I want to stay on the idea, again, for your listeners, that's the question. If you can get into a regular habit of taking a moment of mindfulness where you step outside of yourself and you look at what I'm thinking and feeling and doing right now, and
Mhm.
from that quiet space of outside of your experience, can say, is it working? The answer might surprise you because it depends on, as we had said, what's the goal? Because, yeah, you know what? I might say that not trying and not taking the shot and playing cautious is working because I'm prioritizing the relief. And I'm
Mhm.
okay with that. I'm okay with not being in the spotlight. And maybe I don't want to do what everybody's telling me. I've got all this talent and yeah, I want to win a state championship and people are expecting all these things, but that's what they want. But for me, I really just want to play for fun. And I
Mhm.
don't like being in the center. Then you can stop feeling anxious about it and become a really good focus on your game about, just getting assists and not taking the shot or, Dennis Rodman, just be a great rebounder. Like find something that you enjoy about the game because it's your game to play and excel at what you want to excel. And if that's what makes you comfortable, then it's your basketball career.
Mhm.
Have no guilt about it. but know that that's what you're doing, and know that you won't be the leading scorer. And unless you are Dennis Rodman, you're not going to get to the NBA. And does anybody listening to this remember Dennis Rodman? I hope so. I'm kind of aging myself here,
They've
but he was
got
really good.
um
And then the flip side, and this is where most people will end up, you're going to have this conflict show up that you're going to say, well, gosh, it's working to make me feel better, but it's not working to help me get towards my goal, your aim, as you said, the purpose. And that's where the decision comes up, because unlike saying, therefore, I have to get rid of this anxiety, or I have to think positive, or I have to do all these other things, you create this conflict. And as long as you're fighting your thoughts and emotions, you can't play basketball at the same time. You
mhm,
can't do two things at once. And your experience tells you this. This is why when you can think positively and feel confident, it's not that those are necessary, but when I am positive and confident just kind of naturally, my brain is free to focus on the game. It
mhm,
creates this environment where the distractions aren't there. But the key is actually that I'm focused on the game. So when you do have anxiety and you do have fear and you say, I'm willing to feel this because it makes sense, and we'll go back to creating safety. That's the other big thing. Then I can actually stop fighting what I'm thinking and feeling. And as you said, put myself into the moment of the game, and then actually, quote unquote, suffer. I will put quotes around that, but feel this pain in service of taking the shot and growing.
mhm.
You have to be okay with mistakes. You have to understand truly in your heart that mistakes are for growth. I mean, again, this is all the stuff that I have in the Success Stories membership and when I work with athletes one-on-one. There's a lot of concepts that build you up to that. But circling back, that question, Jack, I want all of your listeners to listen to you when you say that. Your ability to stop and ask, is this working to move me in the direction that I want to go? That allows you a moment where you can choose. That
Mhm.
keeps you in control, or at the very least, intentional. And that you can practice that question, and all throughout the day, asking it numerous times a day, when you're in school, when you're having, dinner with your family, and you're distracted or you're on your phone and you're doing this, and you kind of say, is this working? Well, it feels like it's where I just want to be on the phone, but I look and I see that my parents are over there, and I'm going to college next year, and gosh, I really want to connect with them. This isn't working. So instead of feeling bad about being on your phone and having to put it down because some rule, you tie it into your value and like, no, I want to spend some time with my family, and you hold yourself accountable, not to your instincts and to your programming, but rather to your values, which is not the first thing that we follow. It's ridiculous how intentional we have to actually be the people we want to be.
Yes.
But our wiring and all the, the way that they've done gamification and stuff like that, like there's just a whole bunch of stuff going against us. The way we want to protect ourselves, anxiety, these things, like I said, that are normal and helpful, they are not the things that drive us towards our best, most valued, fulfilled life. But that question that you asked, Jack, is this working? That, my friends, will get you there.
Yeah. You're so good at your articulation, and I'm already learning so much from you. And I just want to give you props. Like, this has already been my favorite podcast interview that I've ever had, because I'm just
Jeez.
learning so much from your calm, mindful approach and mindful speech of explaining it. I'm definitely going to rewatch this and study how you're talking about it. But there's three things that I got away from what you just said. The first is, one thing I say all the time is, the ability to be bored is a lost art. And because of that, a lot of times when we get bored, we run away from it, right? We think it's something we don't want to have. But that's where the time, and like you said, the question to reevaluate what you're doing, just overall philosophically in my life, what's important right now? Am I trying to be the best version of myself in this present moment? You need to be bored, and you need to have time to do that, which is one thing that I think that I always ask myself, why aren't more people into this, psychology, philosophical types of subjects? Is because not a lot of people have time to even think about those subjects or realize how important they actually are to your outlook on the world and how happy you are as a person. Um, but being bored, I think, is super important, because you can ask that question. And so I'd encourage kids listening to not run away from that, because to have that time to sit down and ask yourself right now, like you said, is what I'm doing, um, being the best version of me, is kind of what I would ask myself in that situation. And like, for example, on my phone, my background it says just no, and it says simple, but we try to overcomplicate things. And for me to be the best version of myself, if I just know what I'm doing in the present moment and up to my experience and what I've learned previously, I'll know if my actions are the best actions I can take in that moment for that version of myself that I'm working towards. And like you said, you have to be so intentional about building that, best version of who you are. You have to know what you're doing constantly in each and every moment. And if you're always just knowing what you're doing, and right now I'm trying to be mindful of what I say, that's an example of me extending or trying to be that best version of yourself. And that intentional approach, that intentionality of being present and intentionally trying to being yourself, that's the part that matters. That's the part that's going to grow you and get you closer to that best version. Because obviously there's no such thing as perfection. There's always going to be room to grow as we're living human beings. Um, but that intentionality and being here, trying to be that best version, that's going to get you somewhere a lot faster than not being here and, simulating what it could be or what I should do. And that's kind of where my growth has changed. I was always obsessed with what I should be doing, thinking of it outside of where I am. But if I'm right here, I know what to do. We all know what we should be doing. When we're on our phones mindlessly scrolling, we don't know what we're doing. And so that's why I have it on my phone. The least mindful parts of my day is when I go on that phone because I have such a neurological habit of just clicking all over the place, which scatters my brain. And I don't want that. I want to build my ability to be here and know what I'm doing. And then the last thing I'll say, Dr. Eddie, is
Well, let me jump in there because there's,
okay.
again, perfect agreement with everything you're saying. I want to flesh out. So my thing, like for like my branding, I like to talk about, I help people overcome the obstacles to excellence. And because
Mhm.
I think that that's critical because everybody knows how to goal set and, wants to be excellent.
Yep.
I find that the problem is all the stuff that gets in the way. And so when you had said boredom,
Mhm.
that is a huge distraction. Like a lot of the drills that we have to do are boring.
Mhm.
They're not new skills or they're not exciting. The fundamentals that we have to do over and over and over again. Things like sleep, hydration. There's nothing sexy about these things. Like and they're critical. And the boredom, the fact I've done this a bunch of times, these drills, that's a huge thing to pull us away. So what I want to encourage people to do, rather than just acknowledge that you have to be bored and move on, can you find the meaning in your pain? Can you, if you truly feel like you're suffering or that it's at least unpleasant, rather than just grinning and bearing it or, just toughing yourself through it, because that won't last, can there be meaning to it? Like
Mhm.
when you want to go to bed early, but you don't want to go to bed early.
Mhm.
The unpleasant of turning off the TV, shutting down Netflix, getting off your phone, leaving your friends so that you can go back. When you feel the pain of that, you remind yourself that this is in service of me having a great day of practice tomorrow.
Mhm.
For college athletes or people over 21, you want to go out and party after a win. And yeah, you're gonna, you could enjoy that and have fun times with friends. But if you don't and you stay away from the alcohol and you stick to your training, that's contributing to your development in your career and it will pay dividends. If you're just simply want to eat better and there's a donut and you don't eat the donut and you're hungry, right? And that sucks. It's an unpleasant feeling. But that feeling of hunger, as long as it's appropriate, I'm not encouraging disordered eating, but that missing out on that cake or candy can now be a sign that you're contributing to your athletic identity. There has to be deep meaning in your pain, and you have to intentionally connect the two. Don't just suffer or be bad or tolerate boredom just because you have to. Understand that it's intimately tied to your success, that there's meaning in your pain.
No, and you put it beautifully. And so kind of the big before me, like when I think of myself before and after, um, of course, the biggest part of my life, Dr. Eddie. So my father passed away 2.5 years ago. And so like he was my mentor. He was everything to me. And so the question I would constantly ask myself during that period was, like, why suffering? What's the point? And like you said, everything does have a reason, no matter if it's quote unquote like our judgment, good or bad. And every time I'd ask myself why, the answer was always learning. And like you had in quotes, overcome the obstacles of excellence. You have more growth potential in whatever you're struggling with. That doesn't mean you go out and you try to fail or you try to lose games,
Right.
but losing and failing or having anxiety, running into these problems, you have opportunities in all of these forms of suffering. And so, like you said, it's up to you to make meaning out of that. and the losing and the struggle and the adversity that you're hitting, that's going to put you in a mind state to, again, reevaluate what was the biggest thing I learned from this? Because if that state didn't happen, if that suffering didn't happen, you probably wouldn't have asked yourself that question or found this new realization of how you're supposed to grow. Um, and so that was really just picking up back on what you were talking about. When we think of bad things, there's reasons. It's up to us to make those reasons or to find that opportunity and growth. And so that's really the biggest difference. It's not delusional positivity when bad things happen to us and we're like, everything happens for a reason. That's not what we're doing. We're being intentional. We realize that it sucks. It does suck, but it's up to us to make what that growth is. And you're going to have more growth potential when, stuff does suck.
Yeah. Yeah. And I interrupted you. So you were going to make a final point. Do you remember what it was? I hope.
Oh, crap. My mind was all over the place there. I'm not exactly
Okay.
sure
Sorry.
what I was going to say. What were you talking about before that?
No, I just interrupted you. You said you had 3 points and you went through two of them after the thing
Oh,
before.
no, that was my third one. So
Oh,
my
okay,
third
good.
one was, why suffering.
Okay, good.
But that's also something, so I'll kind of explain. So like my vision with this mental training, my goal is to make it, because I try to take a very integral approach. So I'm a very open person. I try and take opinions from both sides. So Western psychology, Eastern philosophy, all different parts of the ways you could possibly train the mind. Because I don't want to close off any set of beliefs because everything has something to take away from. No one's completely wrong or completely right. But essentially, I'm trying to build something that doesn't come with a set of beliefs, and it's up to you to self-investigate to see if it works for you. It's worked for me, it's worked for everyone else that has touched it, and I'm sure you've experienced the same stuff with a lot of your students. Um, but in terms of where I was going with it, I kind of lost my train of thought. But oh yeah, this is what I was going to say. So I'm sure it's possible that you have a lot of this stuff, but so wisdom's a big, big part of the curriculum. So it's towards the end, obviously, because a lot of the other stuff we learn is more important. But a big thing I talk about with wisdom, and like I just talked about with my father, the biggest thing I did learn was that death aspect. I call it death wisdom. But if you keep death in mind, puts you in a state of what matters. And so that's something that helps me a lot. Like you said, being intentional in the present moment and how we grow. Um, like you said, if I'm nervous or anxious about this shot, if I put into perspective, how little time I have, or obviously it's hard to get it in those situations if you haven't had a loved one die, but it becomes very apparent and very easy what that choice is going to be. It's very easy for you with, knowing that at some point we're not going to be here. I'm going to take that shot. There's no reason for me to not take that shot or to let my anxiety get in front of what I want to do here, what that choice is. So for me, being intentional in the present moment, that wisdom aspect also does help me being intentional and knowing what the right choice is. And like you said, with pleasure, we're going to experience those unpleasant feelings, but you never want to sacrifice the pleasure you have in the present moment for more pain afterwards, which is what that example of the donut that you had, say that donut's on the table and you end up eating it. You definitely, like for me, anytime I do that, I regret it afterwards. So that's creating more pain from the choice that I made previously. So that's another great way to gauge kind of if the action I'm taking is in service of myself, like you were saying. Is it going to create more problems later? And like I said, problems.
Another,
Okay, you go. You go.
well, just another twist on that. Because we're so much pain avoidant,
Hmm.
what you've established here is the idea, the reality that we're like, well, I can either take the pain now in service of the goal that I have, or I could take the pleasure now and have the pain later as the consequence.
Yes.
But there is no option of no pain, which brings us right back to the first thing that we had talked about. We have four basic human emotions. We cannot live. So full circle, it's good timing to pull this all together. It's about living in the anger, the anxiety, and the sadness.
Mhm.
But pain will always show up. And it's up to you about if you're just going to be impulsive and constantly take the short-term pleasures, you're going to have an unhappy life. You're going to be out of shape. You're going to be poor. You're going to have bad relationships. You're going to hurt people. Like if you just keep taking care of the immediate and don't look towards the future. So where is it that you can kind of, again, have meaning in that pain that you choose right away, in your discipline, in your sacrifice, in your generosity, in your humility, in your taking risks, and in the short-term embarrassment for the long-term growth? The big part to remember is that we're not trying to, anything Jack and I are saying are not trying here to make you feel better. And it's not always about the confidence. And it's not about minimizing how much pain you're going to feel coming up too. Like
Mhm.
that hunger you might feel, that loneliness, that embarrassment. We have to acknowledge and say that we do see that pain, and it is real. And we want to validate that. And we want you to validate that in yourself too. This is not about pushing that stuff away, but understanding that pain is a part of this life. So let me choose what pain I'm going to suffer and see if I can use it as an investment.
Yeah. And the analogy I like to use, or the illustration I like to use with the subject you were just talking about, is like, we don't want to be on this endless hamster. We're pulling or holding on to things that are good or pushing away things that are bad. You want to step off that hamster wheel. And essentially, you know, water's just a great example. You don't want to fight, you don't want to swim against the current. Just go with the current. Um, and because if you're going with the current, then you'll be able to evaluate in a calm state of mind, because we're not going to make great decisions when we're in these emotional states. Um, but that resistance and holding on to is a really, really big deal. And learning how to step off of that is what I like to call surrender. So in the Marines Corps, surrendering to results is a really big deal. And that's something we like to preach a lot um, with our kids, because for me, like I said, that aim and aimlessness, you can't be so super attached and obsessed with the goal. So I was someone that was constantly working, and I always had thoughts, what if everything I work for doesn't pay off? Because I'm only working towards this goal. And that's the point. We shouldn't be only working towards this goal. We still have to be enjoying the process or being here for the process. Because if you're only working for one moment, that's a really, really big problem. You should be working for every moment, and you should be enjoying whatever you're doing. But that improvement and making meaning, I think, is the secret sauce to all of it. Because anytime that I'm not happy with myself or I'm not doing well mentally, it's because I'm lacking that improvement or that striving for improvement. And I know I'm going all over the place, Dr. Eddie, and you do a much better job of not doing that. But that's kind of where my thoughts were at. So like you said, it's not about suppressing what you're experiencing as bad. It's learning how to accept it as real. And so how I like to think of it, like I said, surrender. So stepping off that hamster wheel. We're not trying to push bad things away and hold on to those good things. And that comes down to our need to control things. And so I put things into black and white. So you can either fully control something or you can't control it. But people think if I can partially control it, that's what's causing you so much trouble,
Yeah.
because thinking that you have partial control, or like when you shoot a basketball, like whenever kids miss shots, I'm like, can you force the ball to go in the hoop every single time? No, you can't. But they're like, well, I can shoot more and I can work on shooting. Yes, but we still have not had a human that can make a shot 100% of the time. Or like you were saying, there's always more to strive for. Um, but that thinking that you have more control than you actually do is what's really causing you to struggle. And it goes back to that only thing we can control, which is that response. Okay. So it's not suppressing, resisting, or holding on to things. It's learning how to do neither, and just simply learn how to respond in the best way that you're capable in the given moment. Um, so because I remember when we finished the recording, my mind was all over the place, but that's how I was summing it up. And that's kind of how I would put what you were saying in the exact same way.
Yeah. No, and that's beautiful. So again, I like to kind of do these little one offshoots.
Uh-huh.
Let's may take this in a little bit of a different direction. So you get that athlete and you responded completely well emotionally to this idea with everything that you had just said. So maybe a little bit later after that, I would revisit and say, okay, Joe, you're upset that you're not making the shots. And you had said, oh yeah, but I could be shooting more and I could develop it. I would go back to that. So that after you kind of get the realism and get rid of the perfectionism about the 100%, I really like that idea. You had suggested that you could actually be working harder.
Hmm.
And if you're upset that you're not making the shots, that was a really good solution that maybe Again, and this is where the anxiety and the negative feelings come in. Maybe that is pointing you in that direction of training more. Is that something that you would like to do? How are you training? Because I'll tell you, I get a lot of athletes that'll say all of that, and they're upset about their results, and
Uh,
they're simply not working hard enough. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I just mean it in an objective way. The goals that you want require more work than you're putting in. If we just look at that objectively without all the shame and embarrassment, because we are all about, well, I'm working really hard. My favorite story is a pro team I had worked with. They weren't doing well, and they had this pregame. How do I want to put it? They were just like, oh, really bringing themselves up about how hard they worked in practice and how they felt like they should win because they worked hard enough for it. And I had to go in there and bust this up and say, there's a team that many of you were on. We had a lot of injuries at this point, and so a lot of these guys were newer to our team. But I'm like, and you were in that other locker room. Do you think they practiced hard? Do you think that they're not in there saying that they deserve to win too?
mhm,
I'm like, you guys aren't entitled to anything.
mhm,
And it kind of really brought the mood down, but it needed to be because, they needed to be. I'm
mhm,
like, you have to go out there and earn this. And this was a different sport than basketball, but it applies to all of them. You have to go out there and earn this. So can you look at yourself in the mirror and say, did I do everything that I could do? And I'm telling you that almost everybody, including players at the NBA, the answer is no.
mhm,
It goes back to that idea of, well, do I want to give everything? Do I want to sacrifice real time, real money, time with my friends, time with my family? And I'm not saying that you should or you have to. It has its consequences at time as well, but we have to respect excellence. And so many athletes, particularly at the high school or college levels, where you have got many, many more years to grow and develop into the player that you want to be. But you see this in middle school and other things like that, is that you should expect to suck. Like you have so many more years of learning and development that you have to do. It's just unfair to yourself to be so upset about it. And if you can say in that moment, like you did, it's like, oh, like I'm missing all these shots, but I should be practicing more. Well, instead of beating yourself up, be like, huh, I could be practicing more. Do I
mhm,
want to practice more? Is it worth it?
mhm,
And then if so, team up with people like yourself, Jack, and your coach and say, well, then what's the next best step? Right? You're not going to all of a sudden put in 20 more hours to get a coach and go to this training. Like, but what's the one thing I need to do? Again, go to bed earlier, hydrate more, start stretching, take 100 free throws after every practice. What's the one small thing that you could do that's going to up your level of investment to get you towards the results that you want? And again, take care of the emotions first because we're just being objective. Basketball doesn't give a darn what you think and feel. Whoever
mhm,
scores the most points always wins.
mhm. Yeah, and so what you said is perfect, and that was a big thing for me, and I think for any kid that's working really hard to try and improve themselves, is that we get this feeling that we think we're deserving of something, and then when we don't get our conditions of deserving, then that's what's causing us problems. So we need to stop setting conditions for literally anything, like just in general, because when you set a condition for your own happiness, right, you immediately set a level to set yourself up to struggle. Because if you don't hit those conditions, right, then you're not going to be happy, right? If I don't hit this goal, if I don't become a Division 1 basketball player, my whole world's in ruins. Then you obviously got to reevaluate yourself because you're not focusing on the right things. Because if you're only focused on this goal and this is your condition to be happy or not happy, we have a big problem. Um, and so what you were saying, what I think helps with my kids a lot when I'm talking about these things is that this is an everlasting process. This is not going to stop. There is no destination or point where you're not going to stop growing. So there is no destination of deserving or not deserving. Um, we're all equal in that department, and everybody's working. But it goes back to that right effort and surrender. If you simply be here, try to be the best version of yourself, you are doing your controllables. You're doing what you can do to get to whatever this aim is. So you got to just let go of whatever that goal is at that point because you're doing what you can. And then that letting go of the goal, if you are doing what you can control, is freeing because you don't have that condition anymore. And so, and just it's proven scientifically, if you are happier, um, you're going to perform better in all areas of your life.
So,
So,
so I'm smiling because I agree with you and you're exactly right. But here's where I got stuck in my life and career for a good like 5+ years.
mhm.
Okay, Jack, how do you let it go?
That's and that's a great question. So that's something you would have to train for. And so for me, learning how to let go is the time traveling brain. Um, and resetting myself here. Because if I reset myself here, I can let go of whatever did happen. Because again, there's no controllable from that. And there's no controllable of the future. The only controllable lies in here, how you're responding to what is going on.
And so yes, and let me rephrase that because you're exactly right. And I want to be sure that your listeners get this. I read books about how to let go. I watched Brave and listened to Let It Go over and over again. And what I started to find after years was that it was actually having the opposite effect. The more I wanted to let go of X, like, I want to let go of this. And the more I tried to let go of this, the more I was focused on it. And it was having the opposite effect. If I tell you, for example, don't think about pink elephants, what are you thinking about right now?
Yeah, pink elephants.
Right? That wouldn't have, I hope that wouldn't have popped into your mind naturally. But the fact that I told you not to do it, it's called the ironic response of the brain, psychological science. It's a thing. The more you don't want something, the more you have of it. So the more you want to let go of your anxiety, of your pain, of your anger, you are still focused in on it and you will have more of it. So I hate the phrase let it go. Now, to your point, what you want to invest in is that if I truly want to let it go, that means that I want to invest my attention in something else. And it's the degree to which you can invest in the something else that will help you.
Yes.
So if you want to let go of the past mistake, you make peace with that mistake in any way that you have to, like you had said, acknowledging that I have no control over it anymore. By acknowledging that mistakes, I can learn from this and in service of something else. But you find out what is that one thing, like you said, the win, what's important now, WIN, that will actually move me forward. And your practice in learning how to let go is your daily practice of putting your attention where you want it to be so that it moves forward. So you're distracted in your class, in math class, and you're emotionally following that. Your ability to notice that you're doing something else, you're letting go of that, is really by your saying, oh, the teacher is the most important thing right now. Let me bring it back to what he or she is saying. And you can practice that on the daily. And I discovered after years of all this effort and trying to let something go, that letting go is a secondary effect of me actually putting my attention on something else. And that I think is the key, and I think is missing in so much of what's out there about what to do and all the catchphrases that we have.
Yeah.
Guys and girls here, please understand that you need to know what's the best thing for me to focus on in practice, in the game, and go all in on that and allow whatever thoughts and feelings that you have about it. Just drop the fight and the struggle because that's going to get you where you want to go. Whether or not it makes you feel better, I don't know. But at the end of your day, practice, career, I promise that there will be a sense of satisfaction.
No, you put that beautifully. And to go kind of on what you were talking about in trying to let go. And so again, what we're saying, everything has its use. So when we're talking about we want to do this instead of this, we're not saying you're completely stopping all of that. And so the example I'm going to use is wanting, right? We do need wanting to have a sense of direction, but all of us are normally in this extreme state of wanting, right? We have this pendulum with everything. There's overtraining, there's undertraining. You got to try and find that middle way of everything, that balance of not too much or too little of something. And so wanting is a great example because like when you're not trying to do something, that is still wanting, right? And that wanting is the struggle. Yes, we need wanting to have a sense of direction. But we're in that extreme state where if we need something to happen, right, or that wanting to happen, that's the part that is causing all this struggle. And so that's kind of what I was feeding off of there from what you were saying.
Yeah, and I like the words that you're using this time because, and again, it's in the language that we use with our athletes. Do we continue to reflect an attitude of acceptance? And again, the normalcy, not to feel better, but making room for all of these things that have to be there. And the wanting is a big one. If we're ever like the worst thing I've heard people tell athletes is like, it's just a game. Athletes out there who are listening, doesn't that just tick you off to no end? Don't you immediately stop listening to whoever's telling you to just put it in perspective? It's just a game. It's like, to your point, that might be helpful in the sense that, like, I'll never forget a quick story if you don't mind. So in my doing my dissertation many years ago, I just became fanatical about it. I was way too invested. And my advisor grabbed my back in the day, we had discs where we kept all of our data. But he grabbed my dissertation disc and he goes, "You need to take the weekend off." And I flipped out on him. I'm like, "What? Like, here's my advisor preventing me from working on my dissertation." And I'm like, and I'm almost yelling at him, which is really embarrassing. And he's just letting me, he's looking at me. And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I got all this work to do." And da 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 da. And but he could tell I become so obsessed about my dissertation. And he goes, "Eddie, there are a million people in China that don't give a damn about your dissertation." And at first I was like, "Oh," and then
Mhm.
I was like, I went home pissed, but then I was like, that's actually true.
Mhm.
And not only in China, but there's like billions of people across the world. Like they're like most people, other than that, my dissertation committee don't care about my dissertation, right?
Mhm.
And it was like, I am way out of balance.
Mhm.
And so on Monday, I came back after taking the weekend off and I apologized and said thank you. And he gave me my disc back and I graduated and things went on. So sometimes we do need perspective. But when people can so callously tell you that it's just a game and it can feel very invalidating. And that wanting, Jack, that you were talking about, man, I got tears in my eyes that sometimes we want these things so badly.
Mhm.
And we just don't want our emotions to be in charge of it, as you've said. But do not deny that wanting. Understand, going back to something you had said like a half hour ago, is this wanting helping me or hurting me? And if
Mm.
it's inspiring me to get up early and go to practice and to listen to the coach, and that wanting is a positive motivator, then stick with the wanting. But if the wanting is having me be distracted and being afraid of making mistakes, then it's not. And I might need some perspective. So anything that you and I talk about, or a lot of this thing about the mental game, I don't like positive thinking and negative thinking because sometimes negative thinking that I suck really motivates me to practice more.
Mhm.
Even if I'm in great shape and I think I'm out of shape, as long if that's helping me, eat better and train more, then I can think I'm out of shape.
Mhm.
It's like, what's the function of the positive and negative thinking? If I'm thinking positive and I'm confident, and then that's having me take it easy on my opponents, and I'm not practicing as much because I think I'm awesome, then all that positive thinking, confidence is not working, and I shouldn't be interacting with it. What's the function of it? And that ability to go back again, full circle, is this working? To come out and say, what's the function of it? What's the big value that I have? It's that constant interaction so that you can stay intentional.
Mhm. Yeah, and so one thing that I will say to go off it, everything you said was beautiful. The biggest thing, like, if you are being, if this negative action is propelling you to do something that is positive, yes, that's helping you, but make sure we always know the motivation that underlies that. And so for me, what I've noticed is, am I working so hard because I'm motivated by anger that I want to be better than other people? Or am I motivated for the love of what I'm doing? Because whatever that motivation is underlying is building those habits and building different forms of thought and different ways to view the world. Um, and so, what I would always encourage, make sure whatever is underlying that motivation isn't something out of to put yourself above or below other people, because that's the biggest thing. And if it's motivated by you truly love improving at the game, you love to play basketball, that's a more pure motivation that's going to help you mentally compared to, um, I really want to be better than my teammate this year, which is again personal experience, stuff I experienced when I was going
Yeah,
through high school. So being always checking in with those motivations, with if it is a negative form of thought, um, I would say to make sure do your best to watch that.
I agree 100%. That I'm really glad you elaborated on this. And I love the word that you had used, the purity of love of the game and personal improvement.
Yes.
Research has found and experience says that's really your best bet because
Mm.
of the purity of it. That's always going to help and it's not going to have negative consequences. Something like wanting to beat your teammates or even more, a big popular one is to play with a chip on your shoulder. That can work in the short term. And so
Yes.
we're not against it. But you also then want to broaden and say, it might be helping me in basketball, but is that making me a really mean person to be around? And I'm like ruining relationships with teammates. Do I need to always be pissed off so that I can, live a life of anger so that I can stay intense during games and feel like everybody's against me? Like that, I might have some mental health concerns over the long term of being in a world where you're always victimized. So it might have some short term effects, but you also want to kind of look at and say, is this working overall also? And the research finds too, like when you bring it back to the comparisons, this is another big thing in basketball and all sports. But when you're comparing outside of yourself, the research has found that number one, and coaches, this is really important about like competition can help. But the most important thing is a task orientation where we're competing against ourselves and we're working for mastery.
Mm-hmm.
By far, that's the best. The research finds that, well, let me put it this way. The other one is sort of like an ego orientation where it's like me versus you in the competition.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're only doing the ego without the task, people get burned out and it's impossible to continue because you're going to get older. I can attest to that. Your skills will decline. But everybody is going to have their peak and then they're going to decline. There's always going to be somebody else who's going to potentially beat you. I mean, even if you become a champion, you have to repeat that. So you can't stay at the top. It's just not the way it works. So by being totally defined by the ego and the winning and the beating and the winning, it can help, but it's short-lived if you don't have the task and the mastery.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not to say it's one or the other, because the research does find that if you are really grounded in the task mastery, and then you add the extra motivation of kicking somebody's butt, then that's really what you do the best.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need the combination, but we usually don't have to work on the competitive aspect. Usually there's enough of it or sometimes too much of it. It's really about getting yourself back, like you said, Jack, to the idea of, hey, what do I want to do? Am I better than I was yesterday? Because that's where all my control is. And then there's no shame and, constant losing because you can hold yourself accountable.
And that task orientation that you kind of talked about. So like I like to refer to that as the pull. And so I'm always asking myself, where's this switch in kids that I kind of had? And I realize you're never going to be able to push upon kids to do something, or if you want them to learn a certain subjects, or for parents, for example. The growth lies from the pull, right? And like you said, the pull is that intentionality of trying to improve, or your motivation is the love of that improvement, right? And like you were saying from studies, that's going to grow you a lot more than if you're comparing yourself and that's kind of your gauge of where you're trying to go. And any kids that listening to this, comparison is going to limit you, right?
Yeah.
Versus if you're focused on yourself, there is no limit to your
Right.
best self. There is no destination of that best self. It's just an everlasting process of learning how to be that. Um, and so
That's
that's
the danger of goal setting, isn't it? How many
yeah.
times have we been motivated to achieve a goal, then we achieve the goal and we have a letdown.
Mhm.
Now we've done it. But this idea of, well, I could always be 1% better. I could always get a little bit better tomorrow keeps you on the long term, a process of improvement without the letdowns and having to reset the goal. And it doesn't put that glass ceiling on you either. Like you had said,
Mhm.
okay, so you beat person X. Well, okay, that's great. But there's 1,000 million other people who are
Yep.
better than that person X. So I like the way you put it. It's limiting.
Yeah. And so the last thing, I can't remember what you said, but it totally sparked another idea that I want to talk about just before I'm done. Um, is one of the things that makes me mad. I love how you're talking about it's just a game and stuff like that. One of the things that always makes me mad is when people promote or praise someone who's always never satisfied or always hungry. Yes, it is important to not be satisfied sometimes because that is the motivation to improve ourselves. But if you're always constantly wanting or needing something to fulfill what you have, that means you're starving, right? So people that always want more things or want more money or want more material, right? You are starving. So it isn't learning about getting more or how do I get more things. It's learning about how to want now. Because if I learn how to want now, which is the present moment, learning how to improve myself intentionally, like we've talked about 500 times, um, you're going to be more full. And so it's finding that balance too. You can't be so lost in this illusion of a destination, um, of fulfilling your wants because like you said, once you hit that goal, you scratch it off and then you go to the next one. You got to make sure you're still enjoying that part in the middle of everything. That's kind
Right.
of what we have this basketball training notebook. It helps kids, kind of organize what their priorities are for the summer. But the biggest thing it talks about is mission versus goals. Just don't get too attached to those goals, because you're going to lose the whole point of everything, which is the journey and the growth within the journey. Because if you do focus on the journey,
Yeah.
like you were saying, you're going to grow way, way more than if you were just focused on that destination. And I'll let
Yeah,
you.
and that's it. And that's it because so I can't help but jump into what the resistance might be. And so my guess is that the athletes listening to this are like, but if I give up that hunger and that starvation,
Hmm.
then I'm not going to be driven. I'm going to lose motivation. I'm not going to achieve what I want. I had somebody tell me when I was helping him with his perfectionism, he was like, he was a big businessman. He was like, "You're going to cost me a lot of money." And I was like, "Thank you for saying that." I was like, "Because I'm making you a promise. Absolutely not. There is nothing in this podcast that is going to decrease your performance. I promise you.
Hmm.
It may feel that way. Your head's going to tell you that. If you have the habit of always being hungry, and like you said, Jack, it's been reinforced by other people. You can never be satisfied.
Yeah.
Fear is going to be, well, if I allow some satisfaction, some positive emotion, some fulfillment in there, that's going to squash my drive. And I'm
Mm.
not going to work as hard. And then I'm going to get less and I'm not going to be as good as I could be. I need this starvation. And the simple answer is no, that's not true. The research finds, Jackson, my experience tells you with hundreds, if not thousands of basketball players, that if you go to this process and you become more hungry for daily growth, if you reinforce the progress that you've made and you celebrate the wins, you will have more energy and
Mm.
you will be better. There is not a thing that Jack and I want to say that's going to hold you back. We
Hmm.
have no interest in that. It just so happens that the mentally healthy thing to do, right? And we may not care about that as much because we want to win, but the mentally healthy thing to do is going to enhance your ability to win. They go together. You
Yeah.
get both. You
Yes.
get both.
And that's the last thing I'll say is the happiness equation, right? The illusion that you need to accomplish this or success is going to happen first and then happiness will follow
Yeah.
is fake. Okay. It's not
Yeah.
real because you're training yourself to think the destination is what you want. Well, then you have this habit of continuing to think that that's how it is. You want to focus on happiness, the mental aspect first, because everything, like you said, is a byproduct of that success. So it becomes a lot easier to win when you're only focused on racing yourself. You're not comparing or limiting yourself because then in each moment, you're going to be very intentional about growing. So you just grow exponentially faster um, than by imposing those limits on you. So that's a
Peace
big
of knowing when you say the happiness thing, that's
yeah.
still only 25%. So
Yeah.
you will have more moments of happiness as well as more moments of some sadness and some anxiety and some anger. And so your acceptance of all of them as emotional experiences, I guess I would also say you're not defined by your emotion. You are not your happiness. You're not your sadness.
Mhm.
If anything, you're much more closer to the character and the identity of who you want to be and how you want to live. But don't mix up your identity with an emotional feeling because that our emotions are so chaotic and fleeting.
Yeah.
There's nothing to build a life on.
I would like to clarify, and I'm gonna start using well-being more. When I talk about happiness, it's not some like consistently high state that people feel. It's just overall well-being and outlook on life. Like if people come up to you, how I describe it, when I say happiness, this is how I'd say it is. If people come up to you on consistently on basically majority of days, how you're doing, you would respond that life's good, that you're not starving.
Yeah.
And that consistent well-being is going to make success, all the things that you do want, a byproduct versus
Oh,
thinking that the illusion of that object that you want to attain, that well-being will follow after, that won't. So that's just important to understand from my personal experience too, um, that if you put it before that well-being first, everything just is effortlessly a lot. It will come
yeah. I
easy.
love that vocabulary change. Sometimes I can be in psychology. I'm like
Oh yes,
a
and
verbal surgeon because
I knew to do
if I
better with
say
that too.
yeah, if I say milk, you automatically get a vision. Like words mean something, and so I love the idea of well being. That's so much more. Like everything we've talked about is in the service, maybe not of happiness, but certainly in service of well being. And
Mm,
it's more open and it allows more of these other concepts to come through. It's more consistent, I think, with what you're teaching, Jack. I
yeah,
yeah, double thumbs up for the well being
yeah,
terminology.
and I have been using that more, but it just goes back to that pendulum thing that we talked about, kind of finding that middle way, which will be different for all of us. But happiness, how most people are like you, just kind of had that pop of thoughts or how your understanding of it. That would be more on the extreme side of well-being. And obviously being in that extreme side or that very high state of happiness is not always good for us. So it's finding that balance. And I would say well-being is kind of that balance in the middle, where things aren't too extreme, high or low. But seriously, Dr. Eddie, this was an awesome podcast. I really enjoyed everything you said and pushing me to be better. I've already learned about a lot about myself. You really put me in my place today.
I appreciate the opportunity and your willingness to be vulnerable
Yeah,
about.
but I would love to. I'll email you. I'd love to get your number, that we can communicate and kind of bounce off more ideas. But
Yeah.
does another podcast sound like a good idea?
It almost sounds necessary. There's a lot of
Okay,
things that I've left unsaid too.
let's
Yeah, we
let's
got more.
let's we're gonna do another podcast because we're already at probably an hour, and I try to keep mine a little less than that because I know people's attention spans aren't the
Yeah, you could probably segment this, I imagine, into
yeah.
like 2 or 3 of them as it is.
And I think on the next one too, we can kind of dive a little deeper into the exercises we give our kids or certain examples that
Yeah.
kids come in with and then how we handle them. But this is awesome. I'm very excited for this, Dr. Eddie, and I just can't wait to talk to you again.
Yeah, and if I could ask the personal favor to promote the Success Stories membership.
Yeah.
It's really my mission to be able to impact as many athletes as I can. And so this membership, it's extremely cost effective. It's got everything that you and I have talked about. So if people are really loving what they're hearing on this podcast, you can all have access to it at dreddieoconnor.com/membership. Um, and we do deep dives into sleep, into mindfulness training, into developing that willingness and acceptance. All the exercises that we're going to talk about in the future are contained in training. I've got worksheets, and then I've got a community of other high achievers that we meet on Zoom meetings like this, and we work together and problem solve and get your questions answered. So I'm really, really passionate about the opportunity to really reach many, many more people through the Success Stories membership. So if people can kind of click that link, I'd be happy to walk alongside you on this journey, overcoming those obstacles to excellence.
I love the mission because it sounds very similar to us. We're just trying to help people influence more
Yeah.
lives. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for having this meeting, Dr. Eddie. I'm sure we'll stay in touch and have another one soon. That
All right,
sounds
Jack. I
great.
appreciate your support.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eddie.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.